In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a tycoon on Roblox. So the first thing you want to do when you're in Roblox Studio is click on this new button in the top left corner and then select base plate. Next, you'll want to make sure that you've got the Explorer panel and the Properties panel opened up. If you haven't, then all you need to do is click on the View tab here at the top and then make sure that the Explorer panel and Properties button are both selected. Once you've done that, you should see your Roblox Studio set up just like this. Some of your panels may be in different areas of the screen. That's fine. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to build our tycoon, and you can do this by using the Part button, which you can find underneath the Home tab right here. So click to insert a few parts and then use the four tools, select, move, scale and rotate to manipulate them however you'd like. So here's my tycoon. I've just got a very basic part here and some surrounding walls. I'm going to select them all, and then in the Properties panel I'm going to scroll down and make sure that the anchored property is checked. This will make sure that the parts don't fall apart when the game begins. Next, we're going to want to create a button for players to step on if they want to purchase items in the tycoon. So again, let's head up here and click on the Model tab or the Home tab and choose Part here. Then I'm going to just go down here and zoom in a little bit and make it more like a square, and I'm going to then head back up here under the Model tab, make sure that Move is unchecked so that I can finally rescale this part to be much thinner like this. And finally, I'm going to head to the Properties tab, and under Brick Color I'm going to choose a red color. There we go, we've got our button. Let's also add some text on top of this button to explain what the button will purchase. So let's right click on our part, select Insert Object, and then we can search for a Billboard GUI. Click on it to insert the Billboard GUI, and if you have a look in the Explorer panel, you will see it's been inserted inside our part. If we select the Billboard GUI, let's head down to the Properties window, and under the Scale property, let's set this to 4, 0, 2, 0. This will just set the size of our Billboard GUI, and then we just want it to appear around 2 studs above the part, so we can change the studs offset world space property to 0, 2, 0, which will put it 2 studs above the button. If we press enter, you can see we've got this blue outline, and that's where our text is going to go. You can also, in the Properties panel, just set the Always on Top property to be checked. This will make sure it doesn't get covered up by any other parts. So let's head back here, and in the Explorer panel, we're going to click on this little plus next to our Billboard GUI, and let's insert a text label. Now, if we just pop back out here, you can see we've got some text appearing on our screen. Let's just go back to the text label and select it in the Explorer, and then we'll head down to the Properties window, and we're going to set the size of this button to 1, 0, 1, 0. This is going to make the text label fill the entire space in our Billboard GUI, just like that. If we head back to the Properties window and scroll down, we can check the Text Scaled box. What this is going to do is make the text fill the entire width and height of our Billboard GUI, and then we can just scroll up here, set the background transparency of the button to 1, of the label, sorry. That's going to make the background disappear, and we can scroll down again, and we can set the font face of our text. I'm going to choose Fredoka 1. I'm then going to set the text color 3 to be a solid white, so I'm just going to drag this all the way up here, click OK, and you can set some text if you'd like. I'm just going to leave it at label for now because we will change this using a script. So we've got the text for our button, and if you'd like, you can customize it even more by inserting into the text label a UI stroke. That's going to give it an outline, which you can see here is a thin black outline, but in the Properties panel, you can change the color if you'd like. I could set it to a red, and I could change the thickness, etc. So that will do for now. So we've got our button and we've got our tycoon. All that's left to do is now do some scripting to make our tycoon work. Now, just to avoid this clipping issue at the sides of our label, we can head back to our text label up here, and then in the properties panel, we can just change the size to 0.9, 0, 0.9, 0. That will just give us some padding at the sides, and we can also just change the thickness of the stroke like that. And whilst we're at it, let's just do some quick organization to clean up our Explorer. I'm going to start off by, in the workspace, clicking on this plus icon and inserting a folder. I'm going to call this folder Tycoons. This is just going to be where all of the tycoons in the game are going to be stored, because there's going to be multiple players in our game. Then I'm going to insert a model, and this is going to contain each tycoon. So I'm going to rename this model Tycoon, and inside every tycoon we're going to have a few more folders. So I'm going to insert a folder, and I'm going to rename this to be called Buttons. That's where all the buttons will go. I'm then going to right click, select Duplicate to create another folder, and I'm going to rename this one as Decoration, and then we're going to right click, duplicate once more, and rename this one to be called Items. So we will store the buttons in this one, any decorative items such as the walls of our tycoon or the floor in the Decorations folder, and any items that will be purchased will go into the Items folder. Now let's take all of our parts here except for the button. So we'll just select these four here for our walls and our flooring. We'll put them into the Decoration folder. We'll take our part over here, which is our button, as you can see. I'm just going to rename this down in the Properties window, or you can right click and select Rename. I'm just going to call it Button, and I'm going to put this inside our Buttons folder. There we go. That's way more neat and organized. Now I'm going to show you how to add some items that you can purchase in your tycoon. Now I'm going to insert a conveyor. That's a typical item that you use in a tycoon, but it's up to you which items you add. You don't have to add a conveyor. I'm just trying to show you how the process works. So I'm going to go to the toolbox, which is a collection of models that we can use. So go to the Home tab and select Toolbox. And then you can search for a model under the Models section. And I've just searched for a conveyor. And this one looks quite good, so I'm just going to take it and drag it into the world. Now be careful, because some conveyors can have scripts inside of them, which is okay. Just click on the OK button here. But just make sure you check them, because some can have some dangerous scripts which are in there to cause trouble. This one, however, looks good. Okay, so we've got our conveyor, and I'm just going to select the model of this conveyor over here. I'm just going to right click and rename it as Conveyor. Now what we need to do is we need to set some attributes. An attribute is a little bit like a property. It's just a way to store some information about a specific item. And in a tycoon, we're going to need to save the contents of our tycoon at some point. So rather than doing this by saying there's a conveyor here and there's a conveyor there, we can just give every single item an ID, and then we can store information about what items a player's unlocked in their tycoon by just listing off the IDs for every single item. Because if every item has an ID, it will just make it really simple to track. So let's give our conveyor some attributes for the ID. As well as that, we're going to want to have a cost attribute, a price attribute, so that the game knows how much each item is going to cost. So down in the Properties tab, when you have your conveyor selected, as you can see in the corner here, there it is, we're going to go to the Attribute section. I'm going to click on Add Attribute. Now, a pop-up will appear down here, and we're going to set it to be a number, and we'll just call it Cost to begin with, okay? And we'll do the same thing again, Add Attribute, the pop-up will appear, we'll set the type to be a number, and this one will be called ID. So we've now got our attributes. These are just custom properties. So let's set the cost of this conveyor to be 50, for example. You can change this to whatever you'd like, and the ID, we'll just set that to be number 1. So the next item we add to the game, we'll just set the ID to be 2. We don't want any items to have the same ID. Every single ID attribute will need to be unique for every single item. This is how we'll be able to uniquely identify and distinguish between them. So now we've done that, what we're going to do is we're going to take this conveyor and we're just going to store it temporarily in the replicated storage. But before we do that, let's just position it where we'd like it to go in our Tycoon. So I'm just going to drag it and I'm going to put it about here. Now I can see that the conveyor is a little bit too big, and that's fine. I'm just going to move my walls over slightly and just resize everything. And once I've done that, and it's all in the correct position where I'd like it to go, I'm just going to move the button over here as well. There it is. And finally, I'm going to right click on my conveyor, choose copy, and then in the Explorer window, we're just going to create a folder in the replicated storage. And we're going to name this folder items. And then I'm just going to right click and select paste into. That's going to create a clone of our conveyor and store it in the replicated storage. So what we're doing here is we're having a conveyor stored in our Tycoon. So we can actually take this conveyor that's in the workspace and now drag it into our items folder. This is just going to be our way of telling the game where we want the conveyor to be positioned. And then what we're going to do is when we start the game, we're going to strip out all of these items from the Tycoon. And when the player buys the item, we will then bring it back by creating a clone of it from the replicated storage. So this conveyor that's in the workspace is just here so that we can position all of our items where we want them to be. And then when the game starts up, we'll delete these items until the player unlocks them. That may be a little bit confusing, but don't worry, it will all make sense when we see it happening with code later on. So everything is now all set up, and all that we can now do is write some code. So what we'll do is, back in the Explorer here, let's click on the plus next to the server script service. This is where all of our code is going to be stored. So click on that plus and just search for a script. And make sure, whoops, I've inserted the wrong script. Make sure that you insert a normal script, okay, a grey script. Now, inside of this script, we're going to write quite a few lines of code. I'm just going to hide this one here. So in this script, this is the script editor. It's where we write all of our code. We're going to write some code which will detect when a new player joins the game. We'll assign a Tycoon to them. We will set up all of the buttons and handle the logic for when they step on a button. We will handle the currencies, so the player will be able to deduct cash when they step on a button. And we'll also handle the positioning of items in the Tycoon as well when you step on a button. So to start with, let's write some code that will set up a leader stats and some cash for a player when they first join. So here we're saying game.players.playerAdded :connect function player. And this is going to trigger every single time a new player joins. And when they do join, we want to set up some leader stats so they appear on the leaderboard. So we can say local leader stats equals instance.new. We're going to create a folder. And within this folder, well, firstly, let's just give this folder a name. And we can call it leader stats. And we can parent that to go inside the player's object. So we've now got a leader stats folder, and any values that goes inside this folder will appear on the in-game leaderboard. So we want the player to have some cash. So we can say local cash equals instance.new int value and cash.name equals cash. And I'm just going to change this to speech marks just to be consistent rather than quotation marks. There we go. Cash.parent equals leader stats. And I'm going to set the player's cash to be 500 when they first join the game. We'll handle data saving probably in another video. For now, this is good to go. So if you click on the play button in the script editor up here, you should see that when the player joins the game, they have some leader stats. All right. There they are. You can see we're now appearing on the leaderboard with our leader stats. And if we were to head into the players, you can see we've got this folder with our leader stats. So that's what we've just set up using code. When a new player joins, this folder gets added to their player. Next, we want to be able to assign a Tycoon to a specific player. We've only got one Tycoon at the moment, but what we could do is we could just take our Tycoon, up here in the Explorer, right click it, duplicate it, and move it across over here. So we've now got 2 tycoons. Okay, we could do that and have a 3rd tycoon. Doesn't matter, we can have loads of tycoons. But out of all of these tycoons, which one are we going to assign to a player? Well, that's what we're going to work on now. But before that, we just need to set up a few more attributes because we need to store information about who owns a specific tycoon. So if we head back to the Explorer panel and just select all of our 4 tycoons at the moment, and then head down to the Properties panel, let's select Add Attribute, and we want a Boolean value, which is a true or false value, and we're going to call that taken. So that will let us know whether the plot is being used by someone or whether it's vacant, and we can use it. So we'll then add another attribute, and this one is going to be the user ID of the person who owns this tycoon. So this is going to be a number, and we'll just call it user ID with a capital U for user and a capital I for ID. So now all of our tycoons will have these attributes, and we can now check those attributes using code and also set them when a new player joins the game. So back in our script, let's create a function which will assign a tycoon to a player. So we're just going to create a local function, call it assign tycoon, and we're going to take a parameter, or an argument, sorry, of the player who has called this function. So we'll call this function from the player added event down here. And what we want to do is we just want to loop through all the tycoons in the game that are in the tycoons folder. So we can say for underscore, comma, tycoon in game.workspace. In fact, let's create a variable for our tycoons folder. So we can say local tycoons equals game.workspace, wait for child, tycoons. Okay. And so for underscore, comma, tycoon in tycoons colon get children. So this is going to return a table of all of the tycoons within this folder. And then we're going to loop through each individual tycoon and just check to see if that taken value is false. And if it is false, then we know that this is a tycoon that is not currently being used. So we can say if tycoon colon get attribute taken, then continue end, because this will just check to see if it is true. So if this is true, then this if statement is going to resolve. And by saying continue, we can just skip to the next tycoon because we know that this one will be taken. So this is just a check to make sure whether the tycoon is free or not. So then if the code doesn't continue and it just carries on to the next line, we'll know that this tycoon is free. So we can say tycoon colon set attribute taken, we'll set that to true, and also tycoon set attribute user ID, we're just going to set that to player.userID. So we now, what we'll also do is because we found our tycoon, we can just say return tycoon, which will break out of our for loop and stop this function because we no longer need to keep it running. And we can also return nil, just in case no tycoons get found. It will just break out of this for loop and return nil so that we won't continue any further because there's obviously some sort of error that's occurred for there not to be enough tycoons available. So now, back down here with our player added function, we can create a variable for the tycoon which we're going to give to our player. So we can say local tycoon equals assign tycoon, and we can pass the player through there as our parameter. And what this will do is, because we're returning the tycoon once we have found a plot for them, the tycoon variable will become the tycoon object, which will be in the Explorer. So one of these tycoons will get returned to this variable, and we'll be able to reference that tycoon model as a variable. And in case there's an error, and for some reason we can't give them a tycoon because there's none available, and we return nil, we'll just do a quick check to say if not tycoon, then warn could not assign tycoon to ... player.name, and we can just say return end. So that will print out into the output an error message in case the tycoon isn't available. But what we've just done is we've created a script to find an available tycoon and assign it to our player. So if we now click on the play button up here in the script menu, we should join the game and we should have been assigned a tycoon. If we just go to the Explorer and we have a look in here in our tycoons folder, we'll just pick a random one, probably the first one, and you can see the attribute of taken has been checked and the user ID is indeed my user ID here. And just to prove, if I select another tycoon, this second one for example, you can see it is not taken and there's no user ID. So it's picked one tycoon to be mine and it set the attribute to my user ID and it's set its taken value to be true. Now what we've got to do next is set up our buttons so that when we step on them, it unlocks the items. We'll also need to set up the billboards for the buttons. We'll also have to clean up the tycoon when the player leaves. But aside from that, that's all we're going to have to do in order to create a functioning tycoon. And that will be in the next video, which will be linked in the card or in the description. So I'll see you there. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video if you found this useful, and I'll see you next time.